Have you ever stopped to imagine how far someone would go to try to resolve a debt? It may seem like something far away, a situation you would never face. But what if I told you that some people, when they find themselves at rock bottom, are capable of making such extreme decisions that their life would never be the same again? What if, in a moment of desperation, you had to sacrifice the most precious thing there is, your own family, to try to save what's left of your financial life? It seems like a meaningless story, doesn't it? But actually, this is a real story. Dona Dolores' story is not just about an act of desperation. It goes further. It is a cry of warning against the deep inequalities that still exist in our world, where often the value of human life is measured by money and status. Dona Dolores was placed in an impossible situation, where there was no choice, where human dignity seemed to be erased in the face of the reality of an unpayable debt. Imagine the scenario. A father, struggling with crushing financial pressure, desperate to resolve a situation that seemed hopeless. He tries everything, does everything to save his family, and finally makes a decision that no one would have imagined. He sells his daughter, Dona Dolores, to pay off a debt. Believe me, it is not a fictional story. It's real. A young woman forced into a cabaret, a place that could have taken her soul along with her dignity, and all to try to save his father's life, who, somehow, believed that this was the only solution. But why would someone make such a drastic decision? And what does it really mean to be forced to live something like this? Throughout this video, you will understand how this choice, absurd and incomprehensible to many, is a reality that was imposed on Dona Dolores and other women. How debt can turn into a nightmare that never ends. Let's explore how, in this desperation, human limits can be tested in unimaginable ways. The story of Dona Dolores is not just about a young woman sold to pay off a debt. It poses a fundamental question. How far would you go to save the life of someone you love? And most importantly, how far can you go to save your own life when everything you've known so far seems to fall apart? Is a person's destiny really determined by the actions of their family? Or is it that, in moments of crisis, it is the courage to break with what is expected of you that makes you truly strong? Stay with us until the end, because Dona Dolores' story will make you reflect on what it really means to be free, to be strong, and to survive the impossible. Prepare to hear about courage, desperation, and the strength of human resistance. This is a story that, even though it seems distant, connects us with the deepest dilemmas in life. Let's unveil this story of overcoming together in a world where often what is most lacking is humanity. Dona Dolores' story did not begin with a dramatic event or a sudden tragedy. There were no signs that her future would be marked by immense suffering. She was born into a lower middle-class family in a small town where the days passed slowly and life followed a predictable rhythm. It was not a life of luxury, but it was a life of dignity. His father, a simple man, always worked hard to ensure the family's livelihood. He did everything he could to provide his daughter with a life without major needs, believing that education and hard work could take Dona Dolores to places he could never reach. However, destiny, as many know, has a peculiar way of diverting our expectations. Dona Dolores' life, which until then was marked by a simple routine of daily challenges but still with some hope, began to become entangled in an increasingly tight web of financial difficulties. His father, who was always someone with strong principles, believed that problems could be solved with more effort, more sacrifices. He had a dream: to move away from financial difficulties and create a better future for his daughter. He wanted to give her the opportunities he never had, far from the limitations imposed by lack of resources. But it didn't take long for his father's dream to turn into a nightmare. As in many families, the first signs of difficulties came from small debts, those that often seem insignificant when taken in isolation, but which, when added together, can snowball. The problem is that, in a scenario like Dona Dolores, where there was no support network, and where every penny was counted, loans began to accumulate. It was a loan to pay another, a small debt to cover another, until his father's situation, previously controlled, became increasingly unsustainable. Dona Dolores' father, trying to keep up appearances and protect his family, began looking for quick and palliative solutions. First, he tried to get a loan from a local loan shark, someone who promised to help resolve the situation for a very high price. But the interest was unpayable, and soon what seemed like the solution became an even greater burden. When the debt with the loan shark could not be paid, Dona Dolores' father looked for other ways to get money. He sold valuables, objects that had been acquired with so much sacrifice over the years, even those things that had sentimental value. But none of that was enough. He began resorting to increasingly risky loans, desperately trying to stay afloat. His friends, who had previously seen him as a hard-working man, now avoided him, also fearing their own debts. The situation was becoming unsustainable. What was once a simple but lively house soon turned into a place of constant tension. The pressure was getting stronger, and the relationship between family members began to change. Dona Dolores' father, who had always been a pillar of trust and hope, found himself submerged by fear and shame. He began to withdraw emotionally, becoming more reclusive and ironic, trying to protect his daughter from the weight of what he felt was about to happen. And it is in this scenario of frustration and impotence that, little by little, the idea of making a drastic decision begins to infiltrate his mind. The life he imagined for Dona Dolores, full of promise and possibilities, was now on the brink of the abyss. But the worst was yet to come. The weight of debt, which had already eroded his dignity, began to affect everyone around him. What many may not understand is that, in a situation like this, a person becomes accustomed to despair. He no longer knew who to look for. He no longer trusted anyone. The options were running out, and the desperation for a quick and definitive solution began to take over him. After all, how can you save your daughter's life when everything around her seems to be falling apart? But it was at this point, at the height of his suffering, that he found a solution that seemed to solve everything at once, although no one, including him, knew that he was about to turn his daughter's life into a nightmare that would last for years. Now, imagine the scenario. The clock is ticking, and the pressure is unbearable. Dona Dolores' father is involved in a whirlwind of debts, each one more threatening than the last. Creditors knock on the door, and with each demand he feels the weight of shame and impotence. They don't understand what he's going through. They don't feel the despair of a man who has seen everything around him fall apart. They just want payment, and time is running out to find a solution. What would he do to pay off a debt that seemed impossible to pay off? Many may wonder how someone gets to such a desperate point. How can a father who lives to protect his daughter make such a radical decision? The answer is not simple. When you see no other alternative, when you are surrounded by pressure that seems to crush your soul, despair begins to distort your view of reality. The boundaries between right and wrong begin to blur, and the only thing that matters is getting out of the financial abyss. That was how Dona Dolores' father, at the height of his anguish and the feeling of having no way out, found a proposal that seemed absurd, but which for him, at that moment, seemed to be the only solution. A man in despair can cling to every last hope, even if it comes from a dark place with no return. It was a man, an acquaintance, who frequented the city's bars, who presented the idea. He was not a good man, but a man who knew how to take advantage of other people's weaknesses. He suggested something unthinkable. I know a place where you can resolve all this. You can sell your daughter. The money is certain, and the debt will be paid off in no time. At that moment, Dona Dolores' world became a distant shadow. How can a person be able to do something like that? How can a father, someone who is supposed to protect and care for his children, go to the point of considering selling his daughter to pay off a debt? This is not just a question of financial survival, but of something deeper, darker, the erosion of principles in a time of dire need. Dona Dolores' father, overcome by despair, hesitated. The proposal was so absurd that he couldn't believe he was hearing it from someone. But he was surrounded by a wall of problems without seeing a way out. He began to think, what would I do without my daughter? And if that's the only solution, then what else can I do? And that's how, after days of torment, he made the choice. He accepted the proposal. He believed this was a way to save his family's lives, to lift the burden of debt that had already consumed him. In his mind, he thought that by handing over Dona Dolores, he would only be guaranteeing a chance to start over. He delivered her to a cabaret, a place that, although he knew what it meant, seemed like the only viable way out. He didn't think about the consequences. He didn't realize he was handing his daughter over to hell. The only thing that mattered at the moment was the promise of an immediate payment that would solve all their problems. What he didn't know, or perhaps didn't want to know, was that his decision was about to destroy not only his daughter's life, but his own. Because at the end of the day, when you make a decision based on desperation, what you lose is priceless. He didn't know that. By accepting that unthinkable proposal, he was selling something much more valuable than any debt. He was selling his own soul. Now, imagine the mind of Dona Dolores, still young, innocent, without fully understanding what was behind this decision. She, who trusted her father and believed he would protect her, now found herself involved in something she could never have predicted. How can someone they love do something like that to someone they love? How do you balance between love and the pain of being forced to go to a place like that? A young girl's innocence was brutally stripped away, not by an outside force, but by a choice made by someone she loved most in the world. This was the decisive moment in Dona Dolores' life, a decision that forever changed his trajectory. It was not just the beginning of her physical pain, but the beginning of a long journey of emotional and psychological suffering. The sale of Dona Dolores to the cabaret was not just a monetary transaction. It was the loss of trust, the destruction of a family bond that could never be repaired. When Dona Dolores was taken to that place, she barely knew what was happening. His world was still simple, somewhat innocent, full of dreams and possibilities. For her, the future was still a blank canvas, ready to be painted with the colors of hope and happiness. Little could she imagine that, in the blink of an eye, everything she knew would be ripped away from her. What followed was one of the darkest and cruelest moments in Dona Dolores' life. Without knowing exactly what awaited her, she was taken to a cabaret, a place she never imagined existed so real and close to her. What was supposed to be a temporary solution to her father's debts quickly turned into an endless nightmare, where the reality of many women in situations like hers was ignored, their pain devalued, and their dignity ignored. The cabaret was not just a physical place, but a symbol of oppression, a dark reflection of a system that treated women as commodities, as objects to be used, exchanged, and discarded. When Dona Dolores entered that space, she was brutally confronted with a reality she could never have anticipated. She was no longer a young woman full of dreams, but a pawn in an immoral system that treated her like property, with no voice, no choice, no future. The pain she felt when being placed in that place wasn't just physical. The emotional and psychological pain was even more devastating. At first, the fear was paralyzing. Every step, every look from others in that place made her feel as if she was being stripped of something essential: her identity, her humanity. The cabaret, far from being a space for pleasure or fun, was a prison disguised as freedom. Women like Dona Dolores were forced to work in degrading conditions, being treated with total disrespect. Their freedom was restricted to a lie, where the appearance of choice was an illusion. There was no escape, there was no compassion, there was no future. She was forced to live with pain that no one seemed to notice. The suffering of each woman there was silenced, masked by the constant flow of customers, by the idea that it was all normal, part of a system that operated in the shadows. The hope that was still trying to survive within her began to fade, day after day. Each new face that entered the cabaret made her feel smaller, more insignificant. Each new touch, each new humiliation took a piece of her soul from her. But what was perhaps most painful for Dona Dolores was the loss of something deeper and more invisible: her dignity. At first, she didn't know how to react, how to deal with what was happening. The initial shock, fear, and shame were the first emotions that took over his body and mind. However, over time, dehumanization became a constant process where psychological violence was intertwined with physical abuse. It was not just the body that was being explored, but your essence, your identity as a person. She found herself at the center of a reality where a woman's value was nothing more than a matter of appearance, and where emotions were stifled so that the merchandise continued to function. Dona Dolores had to learn to keep hope alive, even when everything around her seemed to scream that there was no longer any reason for it. She had to find the strength within herself to resist, to keep her soul intact, even when everything around her was trying to destroy her. It was an incessant fight for survival. She knew that each day at the cabaret was one day closer to losing everything that was left of her identity. But she also knew that if she succumbed to that environment, if she accepted that she was just an object, everything she had left would be lost forever. Thus, even in the most degrading and inhumane situations, she resisted. Not because it was easy, but because, at her core, she knew that if she allowed herself to be destroyed here, all that would be left would be an empty echo of the woman she once was. The women who were in that place, like Dona Dolores, were living a form of modern slavery. They were not bound by visible chains, but by a system that oppressed them in ways that were as subtle and cruel as they were effective. The cabaret was not only a site of sexual exploitation, but a symbol of how women, especially those without resources or support, could easily be treated as disposable objects. Every day there was a fight for dignity, a fight against the invisible and tireless oppression that others often didn't even see. And no matter how much Dona Dolores tried to remain firm, the weight of such a perverse system began to make her question her own identity, her own reason for existing. With each new night, each new client, she asked herself, "Who am I here? What's left of me when I'm reduced to this?" Still deep within his soul, there was a flame of resistance, because, despite everything that was happening in that dark place, she knew that the fight wasn't over yet. And as much as the cabaret was a place of pain, it would also be the scene of his greatest battle, the fight for his freedom. What does it take to keep fighting when everything around you seems to be falling apart? When the weight of the world seems to fall on your shoulders and the darkness seems to have no end? What keeps someone standing? Dona Dolores' response came from a deep place within herself, a place that no one saw, and that not even she knew she possessed with such strength. She didn't allow circumstances to define her. He did not let daily suffering become the only narrative of his life. Even in the midst of the immense pain and hopelessness that surrounded her, she found something within herself that made her resist, an inner strength that no one, not even herself, knew existed. The environment in which Dona Dolores found herself was not just a physical place, but a mental and emotional prison. Every day at the cabaret was a cruel reminder of her helplessness, her vulnerability. There, women had no name, no identity, no voice. They were just one among many others, thrown into a system of exploitation that stripped them of their humanity. The system, which saw them as objects, tried to erase any trace of dignity, trying to make them believe that there was no longer any possibility of change. But something in Dona Dolores' heart refused to give in. She didn't know how, but she felt that if she succumbed, she would no longer be who she was. If she let the suffering win, it would be like losing herself. Then she began to cling to what was most precious to her, the desire to leave that place, the will to live. It was the only thing she still had, something that no abuse, no disdainful looks, no humiliation could take from her. Life, no matter how much it was being torn apart, still had something to offer. Dona Dolores' journey of resistance was not easy. Every day, every hour in the cabaret was a battle against her own mind and the inhumane environment that surrounded her. She had no one to support her, no one who could tell her everything would be okay. But inside her, there was a flame that refused to go out. She knew that the cabaret could not be her end. That would not be where his story would end. And it was this internal flame that made her resist the emotional, physical, and psychological stress that place caused her. In many moments, the pain seemed unbearable. The shame, the humiliation, the feeling of being lost in a world where your value was measured only by your appearance and usefulness. All of this made Dona Dolores question her sanity. But somewhere inside, she knew that if she lost this internal battle, she would have lost the war. She refused to accept that a life of suffering and degradation was the only possible path for her. The most impressive thing about Dona Dolores' resistance was not the strength she demonstrated physically. This was often not even visible to others. Dolores' true strength lay in her ability to keep hope alive in an environment where hope seemed to be an unattainable luxury. She clung to simple thoughts, like the memory of her childhood, her home, her family, and the promise she made to herself. I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to survive. Every small act of resistance became a victory for Dona Dolores. From the moments when she simply kept her dignity intact, even in the most degrading situations, to the small gestures of silent rebellion. She learned to protect herself, to mentally withdraw when the situation became unbearable, to not give in to the control of others. She became a silent warrior fighting a battle that no one saw, but that made her stronger every day. This inner strength, which no one imagined she had, was what kept her alive. Because in the end, Dona Dolores knew she couldn't lose herself. The cabaret could try to steal your dignity, but it couldn't steal your will to live. And it was this desire, the desire to leave, to start over. That was the engine that drove her to resist and seek freedom. In the midst of so much suffering, she began to realize that she was no longer just a victim of that system. She was starting to see herself as a survivor. Every day that she stood up, that she resisted, was a small victory. A victory not only against the circumstances, but against the fear that tried to dominate his mind, against the constant pressure to give up. Dona Dolores's true strength was not only in her ability to endure suffering, but in her courage to not allow that suffering to define her. Her resistance wasn't something visible to everyone, but it was something real, something that kept her alive, something that would make her overcome, one day, that hell. And no matter how long the fight was, no matter how much each day was a challenge, Dona Dolores began to understand something profound. True freedom begins in the mind. As long as she kept her mind intact, as long as she still believed in the possibility of a different future, she would still have something that the Cabaret could never take from her. After months of indescribable suffering, when Dona Dolores's hopes seemed to dissipate and the weight of pain consumed her day after day, something unexpected happened. It was a moment of distraction, a mistake, a break in the rigid and cruel routine that kept her imprisoned. At that moment, all she needed was an opportunity, and she didn't hesitate. Like a spark in the darkness, the chance to escape appeared, and Dona Dolores jumped at it without thinking about the consequences. In a life where every movement was controlled, where freedom seemed like a distant and unattainable dream, a small slip by those responsible for surveillance was enough to open a door, even if it was a tiny door. She knew this was her only chance. The fear, pain, and tiredness were left behind as she made the decision to leave, to run to freedom, knowing that any step outside that place would represent not only her physical escape, but the reclaiming of something much deeper. Her dignity, her humanity, her identity. Dona Dolores's escape was not just a desperate race for a new beginning. It was a scream, a cry for freedom that echoed not just within her, but to all women who, somewhere, were trapped in similar situations. Every woman who had ever experienced or was still experiencing that type of oppression saw herself represented in the courage of Dona Dolores, who, by escaping, not only challenged the cruelty of a system, but also challenged the very idea that she was someone's property. His escape was an affirmation that, however deep the pain and exploitation had been, they could not be the only marks left on his life. What Dona Dolores did when she ran away was more than physically escaping from a cabaret. She broke free from an invisible prison that had been imposed on her from the moment she was sold. She was no longer just running away from a place of exploration. She was fleeing a life marked by submission, denial of her autonomy, and abuse. The life she knew before that hell now seemed so far away, so unattainable. But with every step she took toward freedom, she felt like she was regaining something that seemed lost forever. But the escape was not simple. It wasn't like a door that opened to a new world without difficulties. The feeling of being free, of being able to walk the streets without fear, without being under constant surveillance, was wonderful, but it was also scary. The trauma of the experience did not disappear with the first step out of that cabaret. Dona Dolores knew she had broken a cycle of abuse and exploitation, but the scars, both physical and emotional, were there, deep and difficult to erase. She carried with her the weight of each day that passed, each night she suffered, each silent moment in which her dignity was stolen. Freedom for Dona Dolores was not just the absence of chains, but the constant fight against fear, against the ghosts of the past that would always be with her. She knew that to rebuild her life, she would need to do more than just escape the place that trapped her. She needed to find her way back to herself, to the woman she once was before she was dragged into that nightmare. His escape was the first step in a long and arduous journey, where recovery would be a daily battle. By escaping, Dona Dolores didn't just free herself from a cabaret. She broke free from a much larger prison, a prison that involved her family, her past, and a system that treated human beings as disposable objects. Her escape represented a break with a life of submission, an act of resistance against an oppressive system that had placed her in a position where she was not worth more than the price they paid for her. His escape was the beginning of a new story, but not one without difficulties. It wasn't an immediate happy ending. Rebuilding her life would be an arduous process, full of challenges. But at least now Dona Dolores had the chance to write the next chapter of her life. She knew that, in making the decision to run away, she had made the decision to live, no longer a victim, but a survivor, with the power to transform her pain into strength. And although the pain of the past and the scars of abuse could never be completely erased, Dolores learned something essential. True freedom comes not just from escaping a situation, but from the ability to one day look back and realize that the pain, no matter how intense it was, did not define you. She knew that the fight for her freedom was not over, but that, with each passing day, she was closer to becoming completely master of her own story. After her escape, Dona Dolores' life was still marked by pain and struggle. The past, with all its scars and indelible marks, was far from being erased, but something in his soul began to transform. Instead of being consumed by grief, she chose to use it as fuel for her reinvention. Dona Dolores did not allow her story to be defined by others, much less by those who tried to break her. She took control of her life and with courage and determination began to rebuild everything that was lost. Instead of allowing herself to be seen as just a victim, she became a symbol of resistance. Her path was not easy, but the strength with which she faced challenges transformed her into a woman who, by surviving the unthinkable, rose even stronger than she ever imagined possible. The experience made her discover an internal strength that she was unaware of, something that empowered her to move forward, not as a shadow of what she was, but as a woman ready to conquer what was yet to come. Dona Dolores not only survived the trauma, but also became a source of inspiration for other women going through similar difficulties. She refused to let the weight of the past keep her trapped in an identity of eternal suffering. Instead, she decided to make her pain a bridge to her own evolution. The woman she became was no longer the desperate, lost young woman who was taken to the cabaret, but someone capable of looking at her past without letting it define her. Today, Dona Dolores shares her story with the world, not to ask for compassion, but to show that, even in the most desperate situations, there is always a chance to start over. She no longer sees herself as a victim, but as a warrior who, when thrown into the depths of pain, knew how to rise up and rebuild her life from the ashes. The life she built after everything she went through is an example of overcoming, of unshakable strength, and of how courage can transform even the darkest scenario into fertile ground for freedom. Throughout her journey, Dona Dolores learned the importance of giving voice to her suffering, but also of using that voice to inspire others not to give up. His struggle is a reminder that, even in the darkest moments, human beings have an incredible capacity to reinvent themselves, to overcome themselves. Her path has not been easy, but she now knows that, although the past cannot be erased, the future is always waiting for those who dare to rebuild it. The story of Dona Dolores is not just about a woman who was sold to a cabaret. It is about the fight for the right to be free, for the right to be in charge of your own destiny, to not allow circumstances to define you. His story is an example of how a human being can resist the cruelest adversities and find in the midst of chaos a path to freedom. So the next time you feel like there's no way out of your situation, think about Dona Dolores. She teaches us that even when everything seems lost, there is always a chance to start over, to reinvent ourselves, to fight for a better future. No matter how great the pain, the courage to take the next step is what truly defines our destiny. If you were touched by this story of overcoming and strength, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message of hope. Oh, and don't forget to check out our other videos about overcoming stories, because life, like Dona Dolores' struggle, always has something more to teach us.